Welcome to Red Pill Diaries. This is Craig. Now I'm going to tell a story really quickly. It's something it's knowledge that I take for granted and often forget that some of these things that I learned before suppression was so prevalent on YouTube. One of these things stems from a video that I watched years ago from a comedian slash historian by the name of Robert Newman. So it's about 13 or 14 years ago when I first seen this video, and it's one of the first things that actually red pilled me. So I really wanted to mention this, and the reason why is it explains some of the similarities of how America modeled its parasitic empire in in the in the same mold as the English parasitic empire, which went, of course, around the world and plundered the wealth of many countries, most notably India, to prop up the fact that its nation was probably not always lacking, but during the Industrial Revolution, of course, England and Scotland were doing quite well. Um, but since then, England tried to become a knowledge-based economy, forgetting that other countries have people that also have brains and also have innovation. And as far as it goes, England doesn't really have that much more innovation or any more innovation than any other country. So you're actually seeing that innovation coming from China, not just production, cheap production. Actually, China are now outsourcing their production to Africa because the living standard of China has increased so much, right? So uh, the thing I wanted to speak about was the how the American Empire, and the English Empire have always had it in for the European Economic Community, and then later that became the EU, and how this is where a lot of the lies stem from the English Empire, the imperialist English people, or the Uners in Scotland who are English imperialists who just should just really go and move south, right, where they belong. Then they can brown nose all they want. So to understand this, I'm going to go back to the the first Iraq War. All right, sorry, the second Iraq War, the second war in the Gulf, right? So this was by Bush two, all right. Um, Now, when he went in there, backed by Tony Blair, what actually happened was the the public were told that they had weapons of mass destruction, and that Saddam Hussein was a tyrant, which he was. But I mean, that's just the normal order of things in Middle East. It's different than our tyranny. It's a different style of tyranny than our tyranny in the UK or in America, right? And tyranny is everywhere. So what actually happened then was the reason why we invaded was to assist America and ourselves. So I'm just wondering if I should start there yeah, I'll start there. So what happened is Saddam Hussein famously, although it's not common knowledge now for some strange reason, but he famously he hated America so much, and he hated the fact that America was helping Kuwait steal their oil by what's called slant drilling, right? That is where effectively, imagine your neighbor has oil right next door. You put a pipeline that goes diagonally so it sucks the oil from under their house, right? That's exactly what Kuwait were doing. Saddam Hussein caught them red handed. This is not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact, okay? As is so many other things that are called conspiracy theories. So then Saddam rightfully attacked them, as he should, because they wouldn't stop it, backed up with America, the same as many small countries that will remain nameless at the moment that think they can push their weight around because America's got their back, right? So what happened was that Saddam actually said something that made the euro gain 25% against the US dollar, and would have led to the collapse of the US dollar, and would have cemented the euro as the new global reserve currency. So please remember this. This is really important. This is how all these things are happening right now with Brexit. These are all related. They don't stem from it, but they're related, right? This is to do with not just the US dollar remaining in control, but it's to keep the British pound in the slowly descending control it had as the previous world reserve currency. It hadn't completely died off. The British pound was still holding stronger in a unit value, and still does, against the US dollar, although quantitative easing American dollar, there's more of them. So there's a higher supply, a market supply, okay? That's called quantitative easing, where you add zeros at the end of the money supply every few years to service the debt. To just quickly explain what fractional reserve banking is, and this is the debt paradigm that we end up trapped in. Imagine I am the central bank and I produce $100. If I give 10 people, who are the only 10 people in the population, $10 each, they all borrow $10 off me, and I tell them that I need 10% interest. When they all pay me back, I'm due $110 back. If I've only produced $100, where does the other 10 come from? And that is how you service debt, by quantitative easing. And that is when you add extra zeros at the end of the money supply. That's it in a nutshell. I'm not going to get into it very much, but that is how the current financial paradigm is flawed, and why we have inflation, and why, when you are not able to inflate your currency so easy, the other tactic is what they used in a few countries, but Cyprus is one of them, is where they put a hold on the banks. They put a freeze on all the banks so people couldn't withdraw the money, and then to unfreeze them, they said, right, you can withdraw your money, but we're going to take 20% of your savings. It's the exact same thing as adding zeros to the money supply, but not to your savings, right? It's the same thing. There's actually 3 different techniques they use that amount to the exact same thing. This is why the old fiat money paradigm is so flawed and will die. In the meantime, America is still the world reserve currency. So how did they protect that, right? So what they did is they illegally invaded Iraq with knowingly false information from the CIA that they had weapons of mass destruction, which we all know now, and it's common knowledge they didn't, but it's also common knowledge that they knew it was a lie. Both Tony Blair knew it was a lie, being fed American misintelligence, but we have our own intelligence that told us it was fake as well. That was not true. But we still went along with it anyway. Tony Blair still tried to talk stuff about chemical attacks and make jokes about laundry detergent and all that sort of stuff before he decided to kill millions of people, because that's what's happened since then. Of course, a continuation of this is what happened in Syria and in Libya, both countries destroyed, both countries with open slave markets, despite us pretending that we are for women's rights and all this sort of stuff. Even though Iran, for example, had more women's rights in 1960 than both America and Britain had in the same period. They had women wearing miniskirts back then in the 1960s, when it didn't actually take off until the late 60s in places like San Francisco and London, right? Again, news that is now suppressed on Facebook and YouTube and in all these other modern propaganda mediums, because they know that the old airwave mediums are losing their effect. They can't just spread propaganda using BBC Radio and CNN anymore. They have to utilize the online ones, and this is why these companies are allowed to become billionaire companies. This is why the S&P 500, instead of having 500 top companies in the world, is actually dominated by the FANG stocks: Facebook, Apple, Netflix, blah, blah, blah. They're allowed to become rich because this is the new corporate hegemony, the new corporate kleptocracy that controls the world because it pays the politicians. So they're a synergy. They keep each other alive, a parasitic synergy feeding off the rest of us, okay? So Britain decided to go and illegally bomb Iraq to help America retain control as having its currency as the world reserve currency, right? Now, how does that help the UK? Well, we have a special relationship. The UK falsely believes that England, the English kleptocracy, falsely believes that they have some kind of honor and agreement with America when they don't. America would sell England down the river as any other country anytime it thought its national security or its finances. If you look at Trump's rhetoric, he says this openly, if it affects American business, right? England would do the exact same. England just realized that they're a very weak, dying empire with delusions of grandeur from a previous time when the sun never set in the empire, right? Now they're a bankrupt nation, producing very little, and their highest exports are actually the 86 billion of exports that come from Scotland. A lot of those go down to England and are then on-sold to the EU. These go together with English exports, which are actually very low. It's less than, I think it's around 6% of their GDP. And Scotland's was about 15. I think it's actually risen now. So basically, for a small country like us, 86 billion is actually quite a lot of exports. So yeah, so that's actually quite a lot of exports. So what actually happens is England take a lot of that produce. Let's take whiskey for example, and they get seen as British produce or even English produce. That's how it's mislabeled. EU was actually sorting this out by putting labelling and stuff. Another thing they didn't like, another thing the EU wanted to do was inspect the financial records, even those in the City of London, which if you're not aware is actually not London the city. It's actually a separate business, a governmental / business entity for laundering money from all around the world, as is the island of Guernsey, as is the island of Jersey, as is Cayman Islands and a few other places, right? So England want to maintain that control. They have this unholy relationship with America, the banking cartel of America, and to a degree of Switzerland, who tried to get their money back off of both of America and England, and were told to bugger off, right? And of course, both Germany and Switzerland said it's okay, we got our gold back, even though they didn't. Why? Because they know that you're already teetering on the edge with the other banking cartels in Germany and in Switzerland. So, for example, Deutsche Bank is in massive trouble right now, is probably defaulting on its loans. Max Kaiser called this about 10 years ago. It's now happening, okay? So there's a guy way ahead of his times and knows what he's talking about. So what actually happened was we entered this illegal war to murder Saddam Hussein, the rightful leader of that country. I'll say rightful because our democracy is totally rigged. We don't have a democracy, right? There's no democracy anywhere in the world. It's all fiddled with, but just different levels of non-democracy, right? So some places are more democratic than others are. But there's no system that's right. Because we don't get to say that our tyrannical rigged system is any better than communism or fascism or anything else. They're all bad. They're all power structures that are little paradigms with little screws and velocity levers and all sorts of stuff to rig the sentiment of the people through, for example, as I've mentioned before in my videos, BBC propaganda, which they don't give you a warning about on YouTube. Now you can't see Prime. What's it called? Not Prime. Damn it! I can't remember the name of the Iranian channel. It's not coming back to me. But there's a state-funded Iranian channel that I think they've ripped off of YouTube now. But it used to say this is funded by the Iranian government. If you watch RT.com now, go have a look for yourself. It will say in the bottom of every video, warning: this is funded by the Russian government. But it doesn't say when you watch a BBC video, this is funded by the UK government. Why is that? Because these corporations are in total cahoots. They were allowed to become billion-dollar corporations by the governments of our two countries, our two regimes. So, so that's one thing that happened, right? So we have that situation where America attacks them like effectively an international mafia organization, giving them a battering and saying and showing everyone this is what you get when you mess with America. Now, Libya tried to play it. Gaddafi, who was loved by his people because of it was a successful socialist country, just as Hugo Chavez had taken 60% of the population out of poverty in Venezuela, which the Americans don't like because why? They did not allow US corporations to plunder Venezuelan oil. So this is why they helped overthrow the Saddam Hussein, so that they couldn't have something that would catch on. In other words, use of Eurodollars to trade oil, since OPEC and OPEC, run by Saudi Arabia and the USA, had agreed that any oil bought and sold around the world had to be done so with US dollars. This is the only reason to this day why the US dollar has not collapsed, despite the massive levels of debt that the United States has, and the fact that China's buying their debt to even stop them collapsing because they rely on the stuff that America buys from them. This is why all governments are just as bad as each other. It doesn't matter where they're not as bad as each other. They're okay, all governments are bad, but they're not as bad as each other. Definitely, England and America are the alpha scumbags of all governments, right? But that doesn't mean that Russians are great guys, or the Chinese are great people as well, right? So as far as that oil situation goes, this is why, if you look at the gearing for war, they're preparing us all for war. They're telling us who we should hate, why we should hate them. I'll give you a quick example. If you're from Australasia, you might notice the amount of Muslims that moved into Australia so rapidly. I live in Slovenia. A lot of the Slovenians have told me, we don't mind immigrants. They said, you fit in really well here, and they don't mind that you're gypsy, whatever it is, right? What they don't like is mass immigration. Nobody does, because mass immigration does not benefit a country. It might benefit the people leaving another country, but it doesn't benefit the host nation, right? And that's because what you're doing is you're changing the host nation. There's no assimilation going on. What there is overpowering. There's occupation. This was done on purpose in Australia. This was done on purpose in Canada, New Zealand, and many other countries. Let's bring in as many as we can. Let's create problems to generate a situation where people want to leave, where they can have a constant supply of human slaves for countries like Saudi Arabia, for countries like United Arab Emirates. I'm talking about physical slaves building buildings, as well as sex slaves and child sex slaves. This is because we have a massive pedophile empire, right? So the pedophiles need a constant flow of children. It's getting increasingly difficult to find those children in, let's say, the places where Jimmy Savile used to find them, which was in let's say orphanage houses and things in the UK. It's getting a lot harder now because it's got support structures. So they had to find their children to rape from different places, and cue the Iraq War. So it's not just oil; it's also about other resources, if you can call, child sex slave resources. But that's what it actually is. And this is why these people like Epstein don't come to justice. And then when he gets murdered, blatantly murdered in his cell, that there's no other inquiry. They're not pushing an inquiry because the whole system is run by, I won't say Satan, I'll just say evil. It's run by pure evil, right? So that's the situation when it comes to the first attack against the EU from both Britain and America. It's to maintain control of the US currency, but also so that the UK pound doesn't slide against the euro, and so the UK didn't have to enter the European Union anymore, because it didn't want to enter. You think back to 1998 or 9, William Hague was saying, "Save the pound." He had a big campaign on save the pound. What that was about was to keep economic sovereignty, so they could fiddle with their money and have complete control over it. And the nations within the UK, which are now the remaining colonial nations, they can't rape from India anymore. They stopped raping from Australia and Canada when Australia and Canada became costing them a few dollars, a few pounds, because as soon as it gets negative, the money, the bean counters out there decide, well, okay, now, even if it's only a few $100s out of $1 billion economy, the English elite are so damn stingy, they will still cut off a country if it's costing them a little bit. This is why you know that Scotland isn't a burden, or else they would have cut us long ago. This is why 5 parties crawled begging up to Scotland for it to stay in the 2014 referendum, right? So to continue on this, they effectively sabotaged the EU economy of over 500 million people, because it was a threat to the American economy of 330 million, especially when you take the fact that we could start collaborating with the BRICS nations, and that would really put the death knell in the American empire as well as the English dying empire, okay? So then you need to look at oil. So America has oil. It's getting harder to extract. They're actually extracting it at a loss right now. But they're also stealing oil from other countries in the Middle East. Now you think, why are they stealing oil from the Middle East when they could steal oil from Venezuela? Well, they had planned to steal oil from Venezuela, but Hugo Chavez stuffed that plan up, right? He didn't allow the corporations to come in. And then when embargoes came in his country, which was economic terrorism, that's what sanctions are. It's to starve the people of a nation so you can point the finger at the ruling party to say it's their fault. And then you can say, look, everybody, socialism doesn't work. even when there's countless examples. Well, actually, not countless. You can count them. The examples like Norway, which is capitalist and socialist. Scotland's capitalist and socialist. New Zealand's capitalist and socialist. But they have a lot more socialism than America has. And so does England. But England gets its money from plunder elsewhere, not from its own economy to feed its people. So, as I say, there's examples where it works because socialism feeds capitalism and vice versa. Now, the oil situation, America's robbing from afar because it makes more sense to, while you can print fake money and get away with waging illegal wars based upon money that you don't actually have, just by willfully putting zeros at the end of the digital money supply, so you can wage war that you literally have not got the gold to back up, right? So that's exactly what they did. And they will continue to do. They'll continue to suck oil out of the Middle East, and then as well as Libya. And then when that's all gone, or they can no longer extract it without spending too much money, then they will recoil to sucking oil out of Canada and Venezuela. Right? Canada, they have to pay for it, unfortunately for them. Venezuela, all they need to do is create the coup d'etat that you saw happening when they tried to install Maduro as president. The guy is laughable. The guy, he had a non-election. They have the most democratic election system in the world that actually gives you a printout of your vote. So it gives you a paper ballot as well as digital, so you can actually go back and you can inspect it. Whereas in England and America, they destroy the results of ballots as soon as possible, so you cannot do any scrutiny. The same as you can't actually. I've seen a while ago there was some rabbis trying to check. Over in this is actually Jewish people from Israel trying to ask questions about the Holocaust. You're not allowed to. You can't do any forensic work on the Holocaust. It's not allowed. You're not allowed to do any forensic work on the banking sector in England and America, because they know that every time they do audits, they come up and showing but that these countries are transferring cartel money back and forward, money from the opium trade, the heroin trade. And it always comes back. It's the same usual suspects every single time, because it's a criminal banking cartel. There is also a modern criminal banking cartel, Binance, for example, the cryptocurrency trading, but I won't get into that right now because it's not the Bitcoin Roadshow channel. And I'm just going to continue on talking about the American and English imperialist foreign policies to destabilize the EU, of which Brexit is the latest, shall we call it, victim. Right, is the latest result in what's actually happening here to destabilize it, right? So Brexit's happening because they want to destabilize the EU overall. Now the EU's done a good job itself, don't get me wrong. They have tried to become more pushing their weight around, but that's they still can't push sovereignty in other countries. Greece, for example, if they had listened to the finance minister, Varoufakis, I think his name is, really smart guy, they would have just said, you know what, EU, bugger off, we're going to do things ourselves. But they didn't, and for some reason, his friend, who was actually the Prime Minister at the time, or the President at the time, went along with the EU rule to give them austerity, which has kind of crippled Greece since then, and has made their economy tank. Similar things are happening in Spain and also in Italy, right? So they're not managing it well, but you need to understand that there's a global recession right now that's going unreported by the news. So America has massive, massive problems. You've already seen probably videos on the street with human feces littered all over the streets of San Francisco and other cities in California and across America. I was living in America for 4 years. I was absolutely disgusted. The 44 states that I visited, the things that I've seen, right? America is an empire on collapse. Over 50,000 bridges in America in a state of disrepair, crumbling, right? Potholes all over the state of Georgia where I was living. And even, Colorado wasn't that bad. I lived there as well. But, the infrastructure is crumbling. The train infrastructure in New York and in Boston, it's a mess, right? It's echoing what's going on in the UK. So their destabilization comes hand in hand with the robbery of oil and other resources. When I say robbery of other resources, let's take, for example, I just mentioned before, German and Swiss gold not being repatriated from America, right? What about the situation recently with to compound the economic terrorism or known as sanctions against Venezuela to crumble their system, to defame Maduro. Sorry, the guy I mentioned before wasn't Maduro. It was actually meant to be, I can't remember his name. He was an American puppet they tried to install in Venezuela. Anyway, to crumble. Oh, bollocks, I put myself off focus now. Where were we again? That's right, repatriation of gold. So because American sanctions, of course, Venezuela want to get their gold back. Rightfully so, because it belongs to them, right? That's what you do in times of austerity when you don't have much money. You're going to sell the family silver, right? But they can't get theirs back because England won't give it. England may not have it because, as I mentioned in other videos, China alone has been buying more gold than all the gold producing nations in the world produce on an annual basis. And you can see the stock supplies of countries' gold, and they're not depleting at the same rate as what Russia and China are buying, which means gold is leaking from somewhere. Probably Fort Knox, and most likely the English Reserve Bank, right? So they refuse to give the money back, their gold back, because they probably don't have it, but also because they're helping again. They're helping hand in hand with America to destabilize the Venezuelan economy so they can bring their corporations in and steal Venezuelan oil, black gold, right? The same tactics being used other parts of South America, the same tactics used all over the Middle East. And now we have a Middle East in complete chaos, that chaos serves all of our countries to have, to have refugees. So a way that they're also destabilizing the EU was a few weeks ago. A friend of mine in Slovenia, his wife, his girlfriend, hi Barbara, she found 12 refugees. Right now, my friend called the police. His friends are in the cops, and then they called some military guys. They came along there and they found that they had all brand new high-end cell phones. These were all Congolese refugees, by the way. They're not from the Middle East. So you get all the way from the Congo with American military backpacks. It's kind of blatant to me. Now, that's why I would think, is it a false flag or is it trying to pretend to look like a false flag? But nonetheless, they had brand new cell phones, which Congolese refugees cannot afford, right? And they also had these American backpacks. Now, they found the backpacks were in a certain formation and they were in a formation that kind of like the dance that a bee does, called the waggle dance, that shows the direction, the type of flower, from a crop of pollen. It was done in a direction which also shows how far the next stop is. They leave some of the backpacks there, they lighten their load as they move forward towards Germany, right? They are actively trying to plant refugees in the EU to destabilize it. The UK had control of its borders, an island. The UK is an island, okay? It's a series of islands. They have complete control of their own borders, yet they're blaming France and all that sort of stuff. No, you've got your own border. Even if France does allow people to enter, why aren't you stopping them coming in? Again, it's on purpose to create xenophobia, to create racism. These are the conditions that put people towards, they're stealing all our jobs, they're stealing our money. That creates this animosity. And that is the ingredient that was required to make Brexit happen. But Brexit had to happen for one reason, and that was the financial sector in England is the financial sector and the military industrial complex, BAE systems, are the only things besides the robbery of Scotland that hold up the English economy. Okay, without it, it would completely collapse. So to keep that going, all they had to do was generate racism. Let's give this Arabic family let's give this Afghani family with 12 kids a nice big house to create resentment with all the neighbors. That gets in the newspaper. And slowly, over time, let's stop smoking in bars. Let's blame the EU legislation, even though I can still smoke right to this day in parts of Germany, Bulgaria, and certain bars. Because you don't have to obey it. You're not going to go to jail for it. You know what I mean? So it was a choice. It's not stealing your sovereignty. It's policies. It's not law. And that's the problem. That's the disconnect between what you're told about Brexit and what the truth is. The truth is they do not steal English sovereignty, English totalitarian control over the whole of the UK. So people were suckered into voting Brexit. They don't care if it destroys the economy as long as they don't have their records looked at by the European Central Bank and other, the financial watchdog of Europe. They were basically going to be able to look in the financial records and see all the fraud that continues every day, the billions of dollars that move between banks like HSBC and Lloyd's every day, moving money from anyone like the cartel to Jamie Dimon's, shoddy banking practices, insider trading, all that sort of stuff. Okay, they ship money to and fro. That was going to be under threat because from I think it was this year, they were going to have to open their banking records, which means if you were in the island of Jersey, you would be looking at massive fines implemented by the EU and shutting down your banking practices to allow you to carry on money laundering. Okay, that is the reason you have Brexit. No other reason. That's the reason. They will do anything to keep the banking system, the criminal banking cartel, afloat. Now, I said I was going to get into oil, so I'll get into that right now. If you look at the oil reserves in Britain, they're all in Scotland, right? A sovereign country within, I think it was in the 1300s, the Declaration of Arbroath stated that Scottish people were sovereign over their leaders. So that means over the king and over their government. This is before the English and Scottish crown were joined illegitimately in 1707. All right. So what happened during that time is somehow we lost our sovereignty, even though it never actually happened. So we haven't lost it. We just have the perception of having lost it. And that is why we should be declaring independence, but we haven't done. In the meantime, oil was discovered where I was born, up in the north of Scotland, and it was sucked dry from the north of Scotland downwards. We're at Aberdeen now. It's getting lower than Aberdeen. You get into the stage where it's getting to the lower oil fields, but they still haven't touched them yet. In 1999, Tony Blair, rather unfamously, because it wasn't reported in the mainstream media, moved the maritime border between Scotland from the international standard, which is along latitudinal lines, to a direction like that, to take in the bottom oil fields. Now, this is against international law, by the way. So Tony Blair, who's a known war criminal anyway, now broke UK and international law by moving a maritime border, when around the whole globe, the standard is all maritime borders go horizontally to match with the lines on the globe, okay? Or the flat earth, if you're that way inclined, all right? So, This is an obvious strategy. It's the same strategy I just mentioned before, why America's sucking oil from the Middle East before they suck it from Venezuela, because it's easier to wage war against Venezuela when your money paradigm collapses than it is to wage war against the Middle East. And that's the exact same reason England's sucking oil dry from the top of Scotland and once it gets close to that English oil reserve, then they will let Scotland go its own way, as long as the whiskey, DNA, video games trade and everything else isn't pulling in enough money. They may let Scotland go free, but more likely what they'll do is they'll let the economy sink further and further so that rich English people can continue to buy castles and land in Scotland. This is the way that capitalists put their foot in the door, and then as the door widens, they keep on putting in it. It's like a ratchet system. It never goes the other way. It only opens up. It's the same as how Palestine was occupied. Well, first of all, the kind of Jewish League wanted a home in Palestine, which was fair enough. They bought land, and they made these kibbutzes and everything. That was all fair enough. And then the 7-Day War happened, and yada 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 yada. All these, you get to the stage where they started occupying land on the West Bank, and now you're at a stage where not only do the Palestinian people not have freedom of movement within their own country, or freedom of trade or enterprise or anything, but they're not independent. They're not sovereign anymore. But effectively, what happened is the Israeli state came in the middle of their country and then expanded out, filling almost all of Palestine now. So they don't have their own country anymore, and they will not have a country of their own soon. So, but the way they frame it is they're attacking us. The same as the way that they framed the attack on the Iraqi embassy. They framed it like, look, this is a first strike. The actual first strike was the American invasion of Iraq, which never ended. They've been there all along. They created a massive multi-billion-dollar embassy in their own country while they treat them like the English treat Scots. Scots are white niggers. right? As a guy, what Indie Truck Dave, if you look at this channel, very good. If you look at the Indie Car channel, you'll see Indie Truck Dave. Have a check of him. But he said the same as what my dad said years ago. We are seen by the English as just other niggers, just white niggers, to a country to rape the resources from. Don't forget that. That's what Scottish people, Irish used to always say that. We're the niggers of Europe, the blacks of Europe, but Scotland are, because Ireland have got their own country. We don't. Of course, the English Empire still has a foothold on the neck of Ireland by having its foot in Northern Ireland, thereby not allowing to have all of their own island. But Scotland has its whole country occupied and effectively controlled by England, right? The English Empire is Britain. Britain is another name for England. Britain does not mean a union. The UK does not mean a union of the 4 countries within it, or, as England would state, the 3 countries plus the principality known as Wales. They don't even give the respect to Wales, a country which predates the existence of England. They don't even call it a country, they call it a principality. That's how disgusting the regime is, okay? So, this is why they're depleting oil around Scotland. They're sucking the place dry. They want to be able to continue on with enough energy to continue to wage wars even when their monetary supply dies. In the meantime, their infrastructure, their crumbling infrastructure in both countries was built using fake money and plunder from other countries. That's about it. I'm going to leave it there. I wanted to explain how both the EU, both the USA and England are complicit in the attempted destruction of the EU, but also that the EU doesn't do itself any favors by employing the same dictatorial strategies that England and America does, trying to become a little bit of an empire itself, when it should remember what it's there for. It's an economic union. Stop trying to be politicians. Stop trying to tell people what to do, even though they're just policies, they're not laws, so you haven't stolen sovereignty yet. It does look like you're aiming towards that, and you made it very easy for the English media spin of the BBC to indoctrinate the people with the propaganda required to make them want to reject the EU, when it's actually a lot less harmful and a lot more beneficial than the UK regime is, and the American regime is on its people, because it also robs its people. The people in the north of England, people in the centre of England are robbed by their nation. The money goes to not just towards London, where people are impoverished as well. It goes towards the kleptocrats. When I talk about English and the scumbags, I'm not talking about the English common folk. I've said many times, and I get really annoyed when people think that I'm being xenophobic. Xenophobia is when you talk about the Scots being scum, or as one young lass put it, when she was dating a young Scottish guy I know, oh, you're slumming it, right? That's the xenophobia that we get in Scotland every day. When they talk about, oh yeah, go back and have your crack pipe, right? Well, even though there's drug abuse all over England as well, they talk about it as if it's a thing of Scotland alone. Scotland has been engineered to have less population. It had one third the population of England at the start of the Union. It now has 1/10 the population. That is by design to create less voters, right? The same as what's happening, attempted to be happening in America, when the Democrats bring in people from Honduras with buses with Facebook and Instagram logos on the side, caravanning the caravan up to California to destabilize California, right? It's to create more Democrat votes, but at the same time the Republicans allow it because it also destabilizes the great Democrat state of California, right? But that's why they've got shit all over the streets now. They're becoming a third world country. They don't care about the people. The people are just useful idiots. The people of England, the Brexiteers of Scotland and Northern Ireland, who are a vast minority. I mean, what's the opposite of vast? A tiny minority, an acute minority, whatever you want to call it. And the slight majority of Brexiteers they had in Wales. You were all useful idiots, fed propaganda. You are doing exactly what you've been programmed by your crappy TV, your crappy shows like Love Island and whatever else you watch, Kardashians in America, whatever the hell it is. Your media designed to distract you, make you brain dead, or feed you false information. In the case of CNN, Fox News, but actually mostly MSNBC, CNN, and BBC, the main propaganda criminal media corporations of this world. Of course, the BBC being a force-funded government propaganda outfit. I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much. Bye.